This is 5 harsh reality checks and 5 pleasant surprises for any DJs coming to Asia for the first time. Hey everyone, if you don't know me, my name is Cass and I'm a DJ and music producer from Canada. I go by the name Faja. I've signed tracks with labels like Armada, Dimmock, and Spinning Records. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about what dance music culture and club culture really is like in Asia, how it was that I experienced it as a foreigner coming from the West, and how I would contrast it to what I've experienced back home. So I want to talk about this today because I noticed that often when I return home and I have people ask me about my experience here, there always seems to be a lot of misconceptions. So I want to give people a bit of an insight as to the good and the bad, and also how my own perspective and understanding of what it's like out here has changed since I moved to Asia about a year ago. I think I'm going to start off with the bad and then we're going to end with the good. This is just my subjective opinion, but I think a lot of my peers would probably agree with me on most of my points. So I think the first point I'm going to touch on, which is probably the biggest influence over everything else I'm going to talk about, is that overall the general demographic in Asia is not as educated on dance music culture as they are back in North America or in Europe. Most people out here will probably be able to name you their favorite top 10 DJ, a Tiesto or Martin Garrix, but probably not as much their favorite upcoming mid-level DJ, which you can often find back in North America. Now, why is this? I think it's because in most places in Asia, there isn't really a rave scene. And why is there less of a rave scene? I think it's likely because, well, if you know anything about the development of the rave scene in US, it was created by essentially a bunch of minorities who wanted to get together to express their own individuality, dance, because they couldn't in most other places. And if you know anything about Asia, most countries in Asia are generally pretty homogenous. And another thing to note, most countries in Asia also generally have a culture of conformity rather than individuality, specifically in places like Korea and Japan. Another reason I suspect, and if we're being honest, the formation of the rave scene in North America and in Europe was heavily influenced by drug culture. Substances like acid, Molly, and ecstasy had a pretty big role in the development of sounds and the culture around raving. In most Asian countries, you're not going to find substances like that as easily accessible, so that's going to have a massive impact on what people listen to and also just the general culture around dance music. I honestly think I could do another entire video on just this point and dissect even more why I think the rave scene is not as large and why the education on it is not as large, but I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know if you want me to do a video on that point. I think I can expand even more. Reality check number 2, which kind of ties into reality check number 1, is that I notice in Asia you generally have to play just a little bit more commercially than you might in the West. Reason for this is that, well, people aren't gonna know the more obscure underground tracks that might be cool in a set, but they're gonna know their big vocal tracks. Stuff like Titanium almost always goes off in any club in Asia. Now, that's not to say that you can't play more obscure tracks in your sets. You can definitely play some, but you have to do it a little bit more scarcely, maybe do some mashups with it, some edits, and really format it for clubs in Asia. Reality check number 3 is that bookings are largely done on a connections basis. You can get booked in Asia without being able to sell hard copy tickets and honestly barely having a fan base, as long as you have a decent brand social media profile. In the US, people sometimes get forced onto shows, but people will generally not take the risk on you at clubs if they think you're not going to be able to sell tickets. In Asia, nightlife is so abundant. People go out every day. Clubs are open 7 days a week, so it's really low risk to book a random DJ. And also, people are going out anyways, so there's no loss really in booking a DJ. Tying back to point number 1, most people aren't as educated on the music, so they're going to go out anyways. It doesn't matter who's playing. But generally, the promoters and the DJs are the ones who are educated on the music in Asia, so these are the people that you need to be familiar with if you want to get booked. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't DJs in Asia being booked on merit. There 100% are. There's people like Wukong and Yellow Claw where they can probably play a club in Thailand, Vietnam, wherever, and tons of people are going to buy tickets just to see them. But Asia is one of the few places where there are DJs getting booked for a few $1,000s every day of the week just because they know the right people. That's kind of unheard of in the US. Now, reality check number 4, which is a really big one, and it was honestly a massive shock for me when I first started DJing here, was that in most countries in Asia, people don't really dance. In a lot of clubs, there are not dance floors. It's just bottle service sections, bottle service tables all over. Now, there are some places I noticed where there are dance floors, people do dance. Bali, it was like that. In Taiwan, I noticed it's like that. But largely, most Asian clubs will just be filled with bottle service tables and people will dance a little bit, jump around, but it's nothing like you will see in North America where the dance floor is the biggest part of the club and everyone's jumping. So that was quite a shock. Now, there's even some clubs in Asia Asia where it's only seated bottle service sections. So I can tell you, as a DJ coming from North America where you're playing for dance floors, that can be awkward as hell. There's no way to know if you're playing well because usually you read the room by how much people are dancing, and also you can't feed off people's energy when they're all sitting down. So that's kind of strange, but there are some big pros to it, which I'm going to touch on after. So this leads me to my next point, which is that in much of Asia, there is a very heavy drinking culture. If you're a dance music DJ coming from the West, you're probably more used to a mix of drinking culture and drug culture. And as you can imagine, the vibe between those two things is very different. The music choice is different, the crowd is different, and the way you have to DJ is way different. It honestly affects everything. Now, I don't want to encourage drug use, but I will say that some of the most fun I've ever had DJing is playing at random raves where nobody was drinking. So that's something to think about if you're coming to Asia for the first time as a DJ or as a fan of dance music. All right, we got all the reality checks out of the way, so here are some of the pleasant surprises that I encountered when I came to Asia. So, surprise number one, which a lot of people love, is that shows here pay way more. Depending what range of price you're in, you might get paid 2 times as much, maybe even 10 times as much. It used to be even more so the case when China had a massive touring market, but post-COVID that's been affected a bit. Still though, because there is such a abundant nightlife and a heavy drink culture, there is a lot more money in the club scene to spend on DJs, which is nice for us touring. Move my camera a little bit. Surprise number 2 is that clubs are much larger and have a much bigger production. The reason for this is that because clubs are built around bottle service tables, bottle service sections, there's a heavy drinking culture and abundant nightlife. They make way more money and can spend way more investing into the club, which is awesome. You can play massive, huge clubs that you won't see anywhere else in the world. The other thing to keep in mind too is that in much of Asia, clubs are actually open 7 days a week. Back in my hometown in Canada, clubs were open maybe twice a week, sometimes 3 if you're lucky. Surprise number 3, which is honestly just a really big positive for DJs, is that the promoters in Asia are generally way more hospitable than anywhere else. They'll take you for great food, making sure that you see the city that you're playing in, and just really show you a good time. Now, that's not really the case in many other places. I've heard friends playing in the US where the promoter won't even give them a $10 meal buyout, which is crazy. So I think the reason for this is that in Asia, most countries have a culture of being very accepting, welcoming, and taking care of your guests. So honestly, it's quite awesome. Surprise number 4 is that it is much cheaper to tour in Asia than it is in most other places in the world, especially North America. You can fly country to country in Asia, sometimes for just a couple $100 instead of $800 for city to city in the US. I've heard varying reasons as to why this is. Apparently there might be cheaper airport fees for airlines and then also lower labor costs. But either way, it's nice to be able to fly very easily and tour very easily when you're in Asia. And then surprise number 5, which is really just a positive for DJs and producers like me who make harder and faster styles of dance music, is that if that is what you make, people will be a lot more receptive to it in the clubs here than they will be in maybe other places in the world. It's very normal to hear styles of dance music like hard dance, hard style, and speed house in a regular club night in Thailand, but you probably won't hear that as much in North America unless you are at a rave or a music festival. Now, I don't know the exact reason for this. I've heard, for one, that in places like Thailand, people grew up on fast forms of music. I have my own theory as well, which is that if you're drinking all night, you're probably going to need more stimulating, high energy music to keep you going. But if you're doing drugs, you can get by on stuff like house music. But I might be wrong about that. Let me know what you think. So that basically concludes my 5 reality checks and my 5 happy surprises that I experienced while in Asia. I think every scene has its pros and cons, and these are just some of the ones that I observed personally while here. So what are your thoughts? Was there anything that you agree with, that you disagree with, or maybe that I should expand on more? I think there's a lot of stuff where I could honestly make entire videos about it, but I'm going to try and keep this one concise. So let me know, what should I discuss next time? Be sure to rate, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you on the next video.